Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, today sponsored by our friends at LightBox. I'm Barbara Duke, Managing Editor here at Directions Mag, joined by our webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. We encourage you to read the latest news, articles, listen to podcasts, or watch a webinar at directionsmag.com. We are excited to have Carl and AJ with us today to talk about location intelligence challenges for business. Glad to have you with us today and look forward to it. AJ, over to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. This is AJ Dunklau. Before I pass it off to Carl to get into the meat of the presentation today and share some examples and demos, I'd like to set the table a little bit by covering location data, key use cases, challenges, and a brief background on LightBox and how we help customers solve these challenges. So first, why location intelligence and location data? If you're attending a Directions Mag webinar, you probably already have some insight into this question. So I probably don't need to belabor the point, but location intelligence brings analysis to life with visuals that enable us to see relationships faster and make more timely decisions that are critical for businesses, particularly as the economic environment begins to change and we're all forced to recognize those changing conditions and adjust faster than we may normally otherwise. And while standard business intelligence or common financial reporting is great, adding the location intelligence element oftentimes allows companies to better understand the where, the why, the who that are actually driving those financial results. Now, historically, disparate geospatial data sets have been challenging to connect, time-consuming to process, resulting in delayed response times as internal teams are really challenged to bring all of this together. So I think you can probably get a good sense of this if I illustrate some of the many use cases for location intelligence. So I'll just highlight a few here, again, as some background. So if I'm a telecom company, and this is an area where we have a number of customers, a common use case may be someone looking to expand their network. So what do they need to do to understand to do this? You need an accurate accounting of every possible location and every possible customer. You need to understand the spatial relationships to understand those costs, distance from the road, distance from the existing fiber, and you need to merge all that information with market demographics, customer demographics, and financial data to really get a complete picture of what the opportunity looks like. And similarly, and today often on the other side of that coin, if I'm a state administrator overseeing a broadband program, I'll need a complete and accurate view of every location to make the right decisions for ROI on taxpayer-funded grants to expand broadband. So I have to understand where is every potential constituent, and even those in tribal and underserved areas that often aren't beneficiaries of great addressing. So being able to merge data sets, taking satellite or LiDAR imagery of where structures are, interpolate addressing onto that, layer in data about who is served by broadband by collecting data from ISPs, understand who is underserved, and what the costs are to reach those underserved areas. Being able to combine all these is incredibly difficult, but critical for understanding ROI when facilitating these programs. And the opportunities for driving business decisions go further than just connecting location data. It's also important to be able to analyze those data sets spatially. So this could be a broad set of spatial analysis, like developers or folks in site selection who want to evaluate a property based on proximity to points of interest, traffic patterns, or demographics. Being able to analyze those spatial relationships and connections is really important to determine the optimal location. It could also be hyperlocal spatial analysis, like determining if a specific building is in or out of a floodplain when a floodplain bisects a parcel. So what makes all this so difficult? Well, the challenge is that customers need structured and connected location data that accurately represents the real world. And many times the data sets that you need to integrate were never built or designed or even contemplated that they would be put together in this way. And it's not enough anymore to just associate an address to a physical parcel to understand approximately what location we're talking about. And this has been able to be done for many years. But it doesn't go as far as it should to truly enable location insight. Now customers want to be able to identify a specific building on a parcel with multiple buildings, know how to identify that, refer that commonly to distinguish that building, and then understand additional data. Is it residential? Is it mixed use? Is it business? How many units are in that building? And once you solve for all those foundational data sets that help you identify the property and the characteristics that you're looking for, how do you attach all other types of pertinent data from your business to that? And again, that they weren't designed to connect. So before Carl gets into the detailed answers to these questions, I'd like to circle back around and tell you a little bit about Lightbox, who we are, and what gives us the credibility to speak on these topics in location intelligence. So who is Lightbox? Simply, Lightbox is the leading property, location, and real estate information and technology platform. We provide data, workflow, and analysis tools to drive efficiency and insight into any industry that touches location or real estate. So as you can see, there are a wide variety of industries, and I'm sure that's actually isn't a comprehensive list of all the industries that we serve, but it's everything from telecom, technology, real estate development and real estate lending, to utilities and governments. And we provide a number of different services. So that the core of what we're going to focus on today is around our location data, property enhancements, and spatial analysis, which apply to all those industries that I mentioned. But we also have leading businesses providing workflow-specific tools to enable lenders, valuation, CRE due diligence, and CRE brokers. So now that I've given you a little bit of background about Lightbox, let me just briefly share some fun facts to give you a sense of our size and scale. So as I mentioned, the foundation is a technology and data company. That's why we have over 200 engineers working to ingest, collate, and manufacture data. And in fact, we're ingesting and managing over 10,000 different data sets. And you can see this sense of the size and scale of the operation when we're talking about 60 billion API calls a year, 2 petabytes of data. I mean, it is a massive data operation. And we've been doing this for many, many years in serving many customers. So, 20 plus years, decades of experience, and thousands of customers rely on Lightbox for location intelligence. With that many customers, it's obvious that we're excited to have many existing customers today on this webinar, at least we've been able to tell from registration lists. But for those of you in the GIS or location data community that might not recognize the name Lightbox, you might be scratching your head a little bit about who Lightbox is and why you haven't seen us on Directions Mag or one of the webinars before. Lightbox is a relatively new company, but our market leadership position in this industry was built by acquiring leaders in the space, oftentimes who had that decade of experience and were foundational players in many of those industries. Today, Lightbox has acquired a number of companies over the last 3 or 4 years, including brands that this Directions Mag audience will probably recognize, like Digital Map Products, DMTI Canada, Building Footprint USA, and several more. And so why did we buy these businesses? What is the strategy? How does this all fit together? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a key challenge in location data is the ability to connect these foundational location data and other disparate data sets. But doing that is really hard, time-consuming work. And so Lightbox felt that we needed to not just bring those assets together, but we needed to bring the companies building those assets together. So by acquiring the leading players in the space, we could use many of the same people that were building, maintaining, and were the foundation for these data sets and data structures to work on connecting them together. So for example, 2 of the businesses that this audience would recognize, Digital Map Products and Building Footprint USA. Digital Map Products is a longtime provider of parcels. Building Footprint USA provides footprints, secondary address information. We found that many of the customers had their own initiatives trying to integrate these types of data sets and actually trying to connect DMP and Building Footprint USA today, in Building Footprint data. But by acquiring both of these companies, Carl and his team at BF USA and many of the players at DMP could actually be the ones leading the work to make sure these integrations were tight, accurate, and done correctly. So by acquiring these companies, we're able to do a few things for our customers. We're able to provide products that are designed to work together, providing confidence, coverage, reliability, and quality in the integrated products. And then importantly, also by owning the majority of the data in our foundational data assets, we can be flexible with the rights and permissions that we allow our customers. And we found that many times customers need that flexibility that we couldn't afford if we were just licensing these key components or foundational data sets. And finally, the last point I wanted to leave you with is that the proof of our credibility in the space is in our customer base, and that the most demanding customers in location data trust Lightbox. In fact, over half of the Fortune 25, or the 25 largest companies in the US, rely on location data from Lightbox. Also, many of the largest federal government departments choose location data to powerful, critical decisions for the country. And we think that speaks to our capabilities more than anything else I could say to you today. So with all that being said, and to really get into the details and the insights of managing the challenge of location data, I'll pass it over to Carl.
That's great. Thanks, AJ. So I'm Carl Urick. I'm in Lightbox's product management organization. So every day, the product management organization, what do? We wake up and we figure out how to build data solutions for virtually every industry possible. So there are a few questions that I want to answer today, kind of drilling in on the layer that AJ laid down here. And let me walk through some of those questions. We want to be able to tell you, what does it mean to have a data solution that delivers every meaningful piece of content? We want to talk about the foundational data building blocks of location data solutions. We want to describe some of the important factors for choosing these data building blocks. Think of it as a little bit of a Consumer Reports guide to data. We'll tell you what's unique about Lightbox's data building blocks, and then we'll put it all together. How do Lightbox data solutions work? We'll probably touch a little bit on delivering and consuming data solutions, and we'll use some short demos throughout to highlight some key points. I'm going to be going through a lot of content. As Barbary mentioned, the good news is our friends at Directions have the webinar available for replay. And also, as Barbary mentioned, please keep the questions coming on in. Probably halfway through, we'll pause and answer a few questions and take a poll. What I want to do is start with an analogy about what we do every day. Every day we search. We search on Google, Apple, Bing Maps to find a store, a restaurant, or virtually any destination. And what happens behind the scenes? These mapping companies, these search companies need to have a universe of destinations, all the restaurants, all the shopping malls, all the Forever 21s, movie theaters, et cetera. They need to know the best possible location for each of these destinations. If I decide to go there, I want to get there. And finally, they need to know every meaningful attribute that may be useful for me. What are the hours of operation? What's the phone number, website? Any clues on whether the location has what we want? And you think about that as an analogy. That's what we do in business when we perform location analysis. You need that same thing. We need the universe of every address and location, every residence, business, government location. We need the best location possible. Ideally, a rooftop accurate location for every address, the building or buildings associated with the location. And you want to know what other addresses are linked to the addresses that you care about. And then every meaningful attribute. And really, I could probably put 3 slides together for every single attribute that someone asks us about. And it's very, very exciting to see all of these data elements that are important to someone. So here's the challenge. Business location intelligence. It isn't that much different than the searching we do in our personal life, with one exception, and that's everything's on a grand scale. If I'm a telecom company, my analysis is nationwide. If I'm an insurance company, I'm using location insight to underwrite thousands or tens of thousands of properties a day. If I'm a commercial real estate company, I'm looking at dozens, scores, hundreds of properties with hundreds of attributes. So really, this is what we're talking about today. If you're on this call, your challenge, regardless of your industry, is probably that you need to manage massive detail on massive amount of properties, addresses, and buildings to solve your business problem. So what should you look for in a data solution? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and drill down. We tend to think of 3 core things that people need. These are really 3 foundational building blocks. And they're land data, which is the parcel or tax lot data connected to assessor or property data. address information, addresses, base address, secondary unit information, really for any type of property, building data or building footprint data, the locations of any type of building, commercial and residential, mixed use, primary buildings, the outbuildings, and more. So what we want to do first, just to set the stage, is walk through each of these and think of this as a little bit of a bind guide. We're going to explain each data set and what are really the three most important things about each that should be considered when you're trying to find your solution. We'll start with land data. Land data, again, parcel boundaries connected with property data, also known as assessor data. So coverage, connectivity, and currency. Coverage really is the starting point. Do you have nationwide coverage? It's easy to gather 80% of the nation, but the last 20% is really, really hard. But companies like LightBox can do that. So really the first table stakes for land data is, do you have a nationwide product? The second thing is connectivity. So are there complete and accurate relationships between the spatial data of parcels and the attribute data found in assessor property data? And this is really important because parcels alone, while interesting to look at, interesting to use for certain things, really have limited value until they're connected to the rich attribution found in property data. And then lastly, currency. Is your data up to date? Are you getting a snapshot of data that will age over time? Or is your data being maintained? Is your data improving, not just yearly, but on a sub-yearly basis? Can you ask for improvements to keep your data current? When we look at address data, the three things that we look at and we talk to our customers about are the address sources, our ability to conflate address information with other things, and currency. For sources, are you using a data set that leverages every possible source of address information? This is a numbers game. Address data comes from cities, counties, regional or state authorities, GIS and mapping organizations. There are certainly other nationwide commercial and open sources of address data. And if you want to find the best address data, there really is that strong linkage with the company that is obtaining the most raw ingredients. Conflation is important. How are you intelligently linking address information to buildings and parcels? If I have address information, typically found as address point data, and I have building footprint data, I want to be able to merge the address and the building footprint data together. And that's certainly a question you can always ask your vendor. What do you do and how do you do it? And currency. You probably get a sense that we're going to beat this drum a little bit. Is your data up to date? Is your data constantly being improved? And then lastly, building footprint data. There really is no nationwide open building footprint data that's highly reliable. So somehow your data provider needs to pull together a nationwide data set, typically extracting features from imagery or LiDAR data. So that the sources is the first thing that you need to care about. And the second is accuracy, and the third is currency. Accuracy can be a little bit of an overloaded term, but what you tend to care about as you look at building footprint data and trying to find best is, does the data have an accurate spatial representation? Is it capturing every building? And does it have a low false positive rate? Are you accidentally identifying trees or piles of rocks as buildings? So how does LightBox look at this? If the preceding comments are a little bit of a buying guide, you can use that in your organization to process your options, and you can use these comments to ask questions to your prospective vendor. But we can think about how LightBox answers these buying questions. So let's walk through land and addresses in buildings and tell you a little bit about our story. In terms of land coverage, our parcel data is nationwide. We're not in the process of building out our data nationwide. We're not 90% of the way there. We're not only missing 100 counties. We're nationwide. But connectivity really is our secret ingredient. We've spent the last 15 years figuring out how to link property and parcel data. Let me drill in a little bit here. So on screen, you'll see an ordinary parcel, anywhere USA. A parcel has its own identifier. In a perfect world, the related property data would use the same identifier, and linking would be easy. It'd be a database operation. But unfortunately, it's not. That parcel's property data may have many different conventions on forms or forms, and every county throughout the United States could be different. For each county, we've really unlocked that formula or that code to figure out how to join parcel and property together to link that attribution to the highest value possible. If we think about addressing, it's really exciting to talk about what we're doing at LightBox with addressing. So at LightBox, again, if it's a numbers game, we are focused on combining a tremendous amount of address sources to create our address universe. We start with our own situs address information. This is our universe of proven parcel level address information. And then really we're voracious about getting as much address information as we can. We go to those local GIS sources at the city, the county, the region, and the state level that have this information, and we gather it. We're currently collecting address information from nearly 2,000 unique sources. Then we bring in postal data, other proprietary data sets, other commercial data sources, and more. And the net is that when we conflate and combine all of this information together, we have a universe of approximately 250 million base addresses and secondary units. But for addressing, again, the second thing that you need to do is conflation. Conflation is that act or art of putting together the address and the building. And so this is our goal. Our goal is to link every piece of address information to the appropriate building and parcel, and to do it in a way where we aren't making guesses. So you look at a couple of these screenshots here. The red points are address information that we're receiving from a supply. The purple are our building footprints. Sometimes it's very easy to figure out which addresses go with each building. Anyone can do it. And then there are other places where the address information has a certain amount of ambiguity, and we need to create methods that figure out how do we correctly and efficiently, with a low error rate, link address information to buildings. And here's the exciting thing for us. Of that 250 million addresses, 80% of our address universe is, in the end, is rooftop accurate because we do such a great job of conflating address and building footprint data. And then lastly, in terms of building footprints, I said that sources and accuracy really are two of the three big things that you need to care about. For us at LightBox, sources and accuracy go hand in hand. Here's what we do. We look at three things. Certainly there are GIS organizations at the county level, city level, that are creating building footprint data, high accuracy with boots on the ground intel. The city of New York is creating building footprint data that is better than anyone else can manufacture on their own. So why not use it? So we gather hundreds of local sources of building footprint data with that high accuracy boots on the ground intelligence. Then we take LiDAR point clouds. LiDAR point clouds, we have certain processes that manufacture building footprints from LiDAR. High accuracy, reliable height information for the buildings. And then with imagery, we capture everything else. So with imagery, here's an area in Harris County, Texas, one of the fastest growing areas in the United States. And it's incumbent upon us to always be looking at the latest and greatest imagery to fill in the gaps. Here you can see there's some new construction we don't have. We have a bit of building footprints on the northeast side. We don't have the rest. So we go in and we manufacture the rest. We think this conflation model really gives us that accuracy, spatial accuracy, high fill rate, and low levels of inaccuracy. Then for us, currency, the same words apply for land, address, and buildings. Because we own our data, we can update it regularly. We constantly improve our methods. We own our supply chain, so if there's something wrong with our product, we can go back to our supply chain and fix it. And we can quickly capitalize on the requests of our customers. We own the data. We can improve it based on our customer needs. So we're going to pause for a moment for two things. We're going to pass this over to Barbary for a poll question, and we're going to see if a few questions have come in, and we'll take a couple questions right now. Barbary, can I pass the ball to you?
Absolutely. So folks, we'd like your opinion on when your organization consumes location data. some preferences there? Do you receive it in bulk and integrate it, or maybe you utilize your location APIs? So, question for you, Carl, is everything that you're talking about just for the United States?
Yeah, so great question. So as AJ mentioned, one of the organizations that is a part of Lightbox is DMTI, or DMTI Spatial, based in Toronto. While our product portfolio in Canada is a little bit different, a lot of the same things hold true. We have the same rich, long track record. We look to link our assets together, and we really, and we own the data as well. So some small differences. While I talk mostly about the US, a lot of our story applies to Canada as well.
Cool. So it looks like our results are in, and folks are either using both or in bulk and integrating it. Good information. One more question before we let you go back to the presentation, Carl. Is your address information standardized?
Yeah, so great question. So all of our data, when you bring in data from thousands of different sources, you need to make sure that it passes through a level of rigor. All of our address information is standardized and validated. Wherever possible, we clean and validate our data against US Postal Service standards. In Canada, certainly we're making use of Canada Post information as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Back to you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Barbary. We'll get back to kind of the meaning of that poll question in a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about individual data components, and building on what AJ said, Lightbox really can bring all these data components together. So I want to drill in on this a little bit. Your data solution is kind of like a puzzle of interlocking pieces when they work together. And when they work together, that helps you solve your problem. Your data is at the center of your solution. It's your customer data, your prospect data, your stores, your infrastructure, maybe some behavioral data, movement data, whatever. And then every piece that you're bringing into your data solution should just work and align with your data and with each other's components. So what does just work mean? Kind of a little bit of a trite phrase. Let's drill in on that. When I think of data solutions working together, a data solution should be easy to join on an attribute or a spatial relationship. It should have the same currency and use the same rosters of postcodes, cities, APNs. You should be able to draw meaning where you need to access 2, 3, or even all 9 pieces of data to come up with a result. And certainly the solution that just works today for you should work in the future as well, and hopefully even work better. So we've seen this a lot, and you may even have seen this before. What happens along the way with data solutions? You go to one vendor to buy one piece of the puzzle, and it's up to you to get value from that. You go to another vendor, and they promise you a single piece of data, but maybe it's delivered in a couple of components, and it's up to you to figure out how to join things together. You may get a data component that purports to be complete, but it's only 70 or 80% of a puzzle piece. Maybe it's missing some geographic coverage. Maybe it's missing some variables, or data isn't filled in. You could grab a piece of open data, and the burden is on you to make that open data work as a part of your solution. Or sometimes you get some data that you thought would look like a square, and it ends up being a hexagon, figuratively speaking, of course. You just get sold the wrong thing. And those are just the technical challenges. If you're getting data from many vendors and sources, it's up to you to make sure you have the rights and usage. And frequently, the data doesn't have, if you do get multiple components from a single provider, the relationships aren't baked into what you receive. So let's talk a little bit about relationships just to make sure we level set here. These are 3 simple relationships. Here's my house. I live in Albany, New York. My house, my detached garage. I have an address, obviously, for my single family home, and everything falls on a parcel. Very straightforward, easy. 1 address, 1 parcel, 2 buildings. Very straightforward relationship to model. Just down the road from me, is a shopping mall. This mall has evolved over time over the last 40 years where the building itself keeps getting additions. It's still one building with one address, one base address. It has many secondary units, but it now covers 8 pieces of land. If you really want to understand this shopping mall, you need to understand the complex building to parcel relationship model, because each parcel likely has its own property data, its own attribution on year built, square footage, valuation, tax assessment, and other factors. And lastly, we have an apartment complex. So this is one complete apartment complex covering 4 different parcels, about a dozen buildings, and each building has its own address and secondary unit information. You care about the system, the apartment complex, and you also care about the individual atomic units, the buildings, the parcels, and the addresses. And you want to make sure that those relationships are modeled and available for you. So those are the taste of the relationships. When we talk about needing to create complex data solutions, that's what we're trying to get, that these relationships built and baked into the product. So you want all your data components to work together. What does that mean? And what should you reasonably demand from your data solution provider? You need someone who's created the relationships. You need some glue, some way to make sure you're able to join and query between data sets. And you need to make sure that you have a stack of products that are meant to work together now and stacks of products that will work together in the future. So this is LightBox Smart Fabric. This is our answer to how do you deliver data solutions, land, buildings, addresses, and how they link together. Our foundational components, parcel and property, together are land, addresses, structures are the same thing as buildings. We have a wealth of commercial property data available, and you can join virtually any location-based data set through spatial or attribute-based joining. So what's our glue? Our glue really is our LightBox ID model. So this summer, we announced the LightBox ID model to govern the relationships between our data. And the LightBox ID model contains 4 unique identifiers: an identifier for parcels, property, buildings, and addresses. And there are a couple of really neat things about our identifiers. First of all, they're persistent. When you can rely on an ID not to change, you can confidently join derivative work or connections to your own data. Also, these IDs change according to rules. We tell you the rules that govern when IDs change. For example, for the address ID, if a zip code changes, the address ID changes. And these IDs also capture both the real and the potential. For both buildings and address IDs, the IDs are based on formulas. We don't gatekeep the IDs. We're not responsible for figuring out the ID for a given building or address. All of that is done formulaically. And as such, IDs can be created for entities that exist now or that could exist in the future. So this is what we want. We want you to be able to plug in virtually any data set that you want into a LightBox data solution. That could be your own data, a commercial data set, an open data set. And I like this diagram because it shows just a few of the ways that you may want to plug in your own data. The most important thing is you have options. So you might be bringing in a demographic data set that has census block or block group as an answer, as an anchor. And you can join that data to an address using a census block ID. You could have reams of commercial property related data. The other day we were on the phone with a company that's bringing in 20 different sources of CRE data feeds, and that company could join their data feeds with parcels, properties, or addresses. You might pull a city's open data building permits from an open data site and join it to our data, probably join it to parcels. And if your data has a spatial component, then you can do a spatial comparison. So think about a mobile movement data set, trace XYs coming off of devices, and you want to join that data to our building so that you can understand the people who visit particular buildings. So the key point here is just virtually any data set that you bring to the table, an open data set, a commercial data set, or another data set that you get from LightBox, can be brought in and connected into LightBox Smart Fabric. I'm going to flip over to ArcGIS to show some of these examples and hopefully bring them to life. I'm going to use a Montana data set. The state of Montana uses our Smart Fabric data solution to support their broadband analytics that AJ was referring to earlier. It's a great data set that shows a lot of different scenarios. I'm going to start just by showing our basic data model. We have parcels in blue, building footprints in green, and address points in red. I can pick a single family home, and I can see that there's an address at that location that has an ID, an address, unit, city, state, zip, etc. Pretty easy to understand data model. We also have a building layer. Buildings have an ID. Then we have parcels with attributes. Virtually every attribute of assessor data is available to you to bring to the table for your analysis. And certainly every parcel has its own unique ID system as well. We have this really interesting concept that's called a location. So the location layer, think of this like a meta layer that conveys additional information on addresses and properties. So the location layer contains information about usage and occupancy. So we can see that for this particular location, it's a single family home, probably, and the location layer validates it. The location layer says, and the location layer, by the way, is in a black square here, identified as a point, residential, single family residential, and we have a variable called residential unit count equals 1, which is about what you'd expect for a single family home. We'll get back to that in a minute. So single family homes are interesting to look at. They're the majority of property in the United States. But let's start to look at things that are a little more complex. Let's look at a multi-dwelling unit. So I think it's roughly on the northeast side of Bozeman, we have an apartment complex, single building, apartment on a parcel of land. That apartment building has a base address and then a set of secondary units. If we look at the location layer, we can see that we've codified this as a residential. We know the assessor land use, how the assessor describes the use. And we can go over here and we can tell that there are 25 individual residential units associated with this. Now we put residential unit count in to support broadband and broadband analytics. What's exciting for us is data is infinitely leverageable. You're certainly only bound by your own creativity. If you're in the insurance industry, you may be thinking about statements of values that you receive for an MDU property that needs underwriting. You may use residential unit count to validate information that you're receiving from a potential customer. If you're in the telco industry, you're trying to understand the upside of network build out. If I build out landline or wireless infrastructure to a building, how many households can I serve? Will it be profitable? We can also match up Smart Fabric with risk data. So let's look at some risk data for Bozeman, Montana. We like this example of understanding property, addresses, and buildings related to risk. Historically, insurance, mortgage industries, those were really the big industries that were the big players in understanding natural peril, especially flood, and how it impacts commercial, how it impacts properties. But now we're seeing almost every single industry is starting to consider natural and man-made risk in some form of their decision making. For example, commercial and residential real estate, telco, utilities, and more. So typically in the past, flood risk was determined based on your parcel. If your parcel of land intersected fully or partially a flood zone, as shown in yellow, your property was considered to be at risk. But the neat thing is we can start to analyze risk at a much more granular level. And it's pretty neat, just you kind of zoom around and see different scenarios. My favorite is this building here, almost completely surrounded by flood risk, but on its own appears to be outside of the flood zone. You might have just a little bit to the northeast, a property that has multiple buildings. Historically, each of these buildings would, figuratively sink or swim together. And Now, with the ability to have individual building analytics, you could look at each of the 3 buildings and determine if each of the buildings did or did not bear a certain amount of risk. And we can move a little to the west. We can see the peril or risk associated with what is probably a manufactured house, a set of manufactured houses, or a trailer park. And we can see, as often happens, kind of that lower socioeconomic housing is in a place that has a fair amount of risk from flood peril. On the east side, in this area, almost every property is exposed to risk, a certain level of risk. On the manufactured housing property on the west, a small portion is. So this example shows flood risk, but your risk analysis really doesn't have to stop there. You could really use a smart fabric solution to look at what's your wildfire risk, how close am I to a fire station, or virtually any other peril can be mapped against addresses, property, and buildings. Let me show 1 or 2 last examples here. You know, we talked a little bit about relationships and pre-creating relationships between land, buildings, and addresses. In this demo, we have a number of standalone tables that have these pre-baked relationships. One that I'll demonstrate here is the address to parcel relationship. We've gone through and we've determined ahead of time the complete set of M-to-N relationships between an address and addresses and a parcel or parcels. And for the state of Montana, there are 700, almost 800,000 of these relationships. Let me go to a bookmark here, and I think I call it the super manufactured housing bookmark. Just a really interesting tract parcel, probably about 100 or so manufactured houses in a really large lot. And having a pre-created relationship table between addresses and parcels lets you immediately get to work. You do not have to bear the burden of crafting these relationships. You can start with an address for any one of these manufactured houses and get the associated parcel. You could start with a parcel and get every associated address. You could start with an address, find the parcel, and then find every other address associated with the parcel. And while these are things you could also do spatially for a very simple example like this, what gets more complex is when you get to really more complicated M-to-N relationships between addresses, buildings, and parcels. And all of those relationships are pre-created and baked into our product. The last demo I'll show is a quick snapshot on business data. I was trying to decide whether to go business or residential. I landed on business. So and I went business. So one of our great data partners is Data Axle. If you're not familiar with Data Axle, their product portfolios centered around business data. So where are the businesses, what is the complete set of businesses, and what are the characteristics of the businesses? So this is what we do. You know, Data Axle doesn't come out of the box aligning with LightBox buildings. We have the business layer here as yellow triangles, and we have a set of a bunch of businesses here, here, and here. And if we looked at, this is in Billings, Montana, between those 3 locations, there are 7 businesses. If you look through the businesses just by name, we kind of get the sense that they're probably maybe associated with like a white-collar office building. So what do we provide? We know that all of those businesses, regardless of their address, is associated with this building. And we provide a building ID to business ID correspondence file, again, really to make it as easy as possible for you to get value from Data Axle business data and to get insight into the business occupancy of particular buildings. You know, many of our customers want to understand that business occupancy. Commercial real estate company might want to understand occupancy of a building to understand if it's upscale, downscale, chain or local, how many businesses, how much space do they occupy, or a telco company, again, may want to understand the upside of connecting service to a building. So those are 5 very, very short examples that give you a taste of the data in our solutions, how the data are connected, and the types of problems that you can solve. I want to go back to our poll question, which is, how do you like to consume data? And here's the good news. The good news is that at Lightbox, we want to be able to support everyone. We have clients who license our data solutions in bulk. Every once in a while, we back the truck up and deliver a massive amount of data in shape format or GDB format data, and we can help you integrate the data into your consumption model. Do you need an API-only experience? This summer, we announced the Lightbox developer portfolio or developer platform, complete suite of endpoints to access address, location, building, parcel, and property information, more API endpoints to come. And what's really cool is we see a lot of customers who want that fusion of the two, receive certain data in bulk, use it in your workflow, and on a just-in-time basis, when you need additional information, you can fetch it via API. So I'm going to wrap up here and move into questions. But first, let me just go back to the beginning. At the beginning, I said, hey, if you're on this call, you likely have a challenge. Regardless of your industry, you have business problems that require you to marshal and join together enormous detail on massive amounts of properties, addresses, buildings, and your own data. We talked about 3 key things that you need to think about: how to pick the best data building blocks, what to look for when a company says these building blocks work together, and how to build data solutions that lets you bring in every meaningful attribute. Now, I talked a bit about how Lightbox solutions achieve all 3 of those things. Last thing I'll say, I'll echo AJ, there are many ways that you can use your time in a day, and we appreciate you spending some time with us in Directions Magazine. And with that, let's open up the floor for questions.
Absolutely. So let's start with, and I want to say that maybe AJ touched on this earlier, but how many parcels and property records do you have in your database?
Yeah, let me think here. Sometimes there are some numbers I have the tip on my tongue and some I don't. We certainly have over 150 million parcels in our database. And on the property records, I apologize, I don't know the exact number offhand, but we can certainly circle back on that.
That's great. Carl, one for you. What are some of the most difficult challenges that Lightbox has overcome to solve the problems of location data accuracy and currency?
Yeah, so great question. Certainly land, address, and buildings all have their own complexities to them. On the building footprint front, we're really proud of our model that looks at many different ways of harvesting and manufacturing the highest accuracy building footprint data. Right now, we have a project underway to add in height information to our buildings. We have about 50 million buildings with height. We're increasing that number by about 2x. Incredible technical achievement. On the addressing side, a lot of it is just how do you go and find information for areas that are unserved? AJ touched on this a little bit. It's easy to get data for New York City. Almost anyone can do that. It certainly takes a little bit of technical aptitude, but here are the places where it's challenging. Creating great location data for places that are lower socioeconomic, places that are tribal, places that are remote, places that are Native American lands in the United States, Aboriginal lands in Canada. These are the places that are really challenging to make sure that heretofore underserved communities from a location intelligence perspective are actually served. So those are a few of the challenges certainly that come to mind, Barbary.
Awesome. We have someone that says they have a list of data axle IDs. Can I get square footage of the building even if it has multiple floors?
Yeah, so that's a great thing. If we've built that relationship that provides that data axle to building footprint layer, you could not easily, but certainly you could go data axle ID to building to property or to parcel and then into the property data and really understand that square footage. Also on the data axle side, data axle does have some modeled square footage data, and we'd probably work with you to determine kind of what level of accuracy that you need to be able to identify square footage per entity. definitely hit us up afterwards, and we'd love to talk about a solution.
That's great. AJ, one for you. I know that you guys talked about some things being complete or in progress, and those are great questions to ask. So someone is asking, is the Smart Fabric product complete or still a work in progress?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Barbary. So the Smart Fabric is complete. It is out and available, and it is something that, I guess what does complete mean, in the sense that we have a comprehensive roadmap of a number of updates for the foreseeable future that will continue to enhance it. As we add new models, as we add new data sets that So I think complete may be a difficult goal to say, but the functionality that we talked about today is complete and available to customers.
Wonderful. Oh, that's great news. We live in a world of public beta, so I know that's helpful to everyone. Okay, so just a reminder, folks, that we do have recordings and attendance certificates coming to your inbox in the coming days. So keep an eye out for that. Also, make a note of this information on the screen. They are generously going to follow up with you if you think of that question later on. So one more question for you, gentlemen, here is talking about accuracy and it looks like and currency again. Particularly, how can LightBox help solve those problems of the accuracy that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think anytime someone comes to us and asks about accuracy, we tend to ask sort of 5 questions to drill in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely use cases. If I looked at building footprint accuracy, I would say you probably don't want to use our building footprints for an engineering grade survey or to fly a drone around programmatically. Maybe there are certain things that are out of scope. But typically we can answer most accuracy questions by putting data in people's hands and saying, the best test to determine if our data is accurate enough for your use is to put data in your hands and let's discover together if it's accurate enough. Accuracy could be at the address level, the building level, the parcel level, et cetera. So certainly most times when we get questions related to accuracy, it spawns a conversation and some test driving of the data.
That's great. I think it's important for us all to remember that most of these things start with a good conversation about what's really needed and important. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate you being here today. We appreciate our audience today. Remember to keep an eye on that inbox. We also appreciate your input on the survey on the way out. Special thanks to Matt and Sherry and Rebecca for their help with logistics. And we hope that you'll go make it a great day. Tell a friend about LightBox and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.